Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shanty. So, with COVID largely subsiding, hopefully, knock on wood, and certainly the state's activity with respect to COVID largely subsiding, it's been a little difficult lately to come up with topics for this particular podcast. And I worry about repeating myself. And I may be doing that here. This may be a topic we've already touched on. I'm not going to go back and look at all of them to find out, but this may be a topic we touched on. But we're going to touch on it in a little different way. And the reason I want to talk about the topic that we're going to talk about today is because every once in a while, the employment law fairy drops a little employment law fairy dust on us, and boom, we have an idea.
I am the employment law fairy. Wake up!
So exactly what did the employment law fairy just bang into my head that I want to talk about? Well, what I want to talk about is sexual harassment and improper relationships in the workplace. And the reason I want to talk about that is because on September 22, 2022, the Boston Celtics issued the following news release. Boston Celtics suspend head coach Ime Udoka. I think I'm saying that right. And the press release says in full, the Boston Celtics announced today that the team has suspended head coach Ime Udoka for the 22-23 season for violations of team policies. A decision about his future with the Celtics beyond this season will be made at a later date. The suspension takes effect immediately. So what team policies, you might ask, are we talking about? Well, the Boston Celtics don't ever really say what team policies the coach violated, but what they do say is that they conducted an investigation by an independent law firm and determined there was violations of team policies. Now, ESPN is reporting that the coach had a, quote, consensual relationship with a female member of the team staff, period, end quote. Interesting. So what words haven't you heard in any of these things? The words you haven't heard are sexual harassment. Isn't that what we're talking about? No, not necessarily. So let's talk a minute. There's really two things that I want you to get out of this. Number one is the difference between a violation of a team policy and violation of a law. So what's the law with respect to sexual harassment? Well, you know what the law is. You should know what the law is. And we'll use the EEOC definition, not the Michigan definition, even though they're largely the same. We'll use the EEOC definition. So the EEOC defines sexual harassment as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature constitutes sexual harassment when submission to or rejection of the conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of the individual's employment. Submission to or rejection of such conduct by an individual is used as a basis for employment decisions affecting such individual. Such conduct unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance and creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. That is the definition of sexual harassment that we all know. If you've gone through my training, you know that because it's in there. Well, that's not what ESPN is reporting that the coach was suspended for. As a matter of fact, that's not what the coach is, or the team is reporting what the coach is suspended for. They're reporting that he was suspended for violation of team policy. So this is point number one that I would like you to get out of this. You can break a company rule without breaking the law, even when it comes to something like inappropriate, intimate relationships between a supervisor and a subordinate. Now, you all do have harassment policies against harassment. And those policies are probably broader than just the definition that we just read there. but they encompass within them harassment largely based on, for most of you, membership in a protected category. So it's either sexual harassment or racial harassment or age harassment or sexual orientation harassment or gender identity harassment or all of those things. But we're talking about, when we're talking about breaking the law, we're talking about harassment based on a protected category. It's not what happened here. How do we know that? Well, that's not what is being reported happened here. Although there is some reports that the coach did make comments to the female staffer involved that she found unwelcome at a later date after the relationship. And that could be sexual harassment. But at least what we're talking about here, based on what the team announced, is that the coach violated policies, not that the coach committed sexual harassment. That's an important distinction, especially in a public announcement like this. Because if what the Boston Celtics had announced, or in your case, if what you fire the employee for is committing quote unquote sexual harassment, you better be able to prove that the coach committed sexual harassment, or you might subject yourself to a defamation claim. Right? In this case, based on what's being reported, the coach didn't commit sexual harassment. Why? Because the relationship was, it is reported, consensual. All right? Under the definition of sexual harassment from the EEOC, the conduct has to be unwanted. Now, there's Supreme Court case law, very, very early Supreme Court case law, that does say that consensual conduct can be unwanted or unwelcome. And we're not going to get into that, but it can say that, which is getting us to the point of what do you want to have policies about in your workplace? Certainly you want to have a policy against harassment, don't you? You absolutely want to have a policy against harassment. But should you have a policy that says supervisors can't date subordinates? Now, in this case, the supervisor was married, and if you're married and you're dating one of your subordinates, at least in my case, I'm going to have a way bigger problem than losing my job because I'm going to have to deal with my spouse. But do you want to have, even if you're single and dating a subordinate, is that a good idea? And the answer is no. It's not a good idea for a supervisor to date subordinates. Why? Because even if the conduct is wanted or consensual now, what happens when it becomes unwanted or not consensual? When folks break up, then what happens? And it happens. People break up. Not everybody stays together forever. People, go their merry ways. And then you're in a situation where you've got somebody who has authority over another individual's work, who had a relationship with that person, who no longer has a relationship with that person, who can be accused of unwanted conduct. So you want to think about a policy that covers this situation. Take a look at your handbook and see if it's in there. Do you tell your supervisors, don't have relationships with your subordinates? Or don't you? And if you don't, is that something that you want to do? Now, the other thing that I want to touch on here is the penalty. Okay, if we go back to the press release, it says that the head coach is suspended for the 22-23 season for violations of team policies. But then it goes on to say a decision about his future with the Celtics beyond this season will be made at a later date. So, in other words, he might get fired. We don't know yet. Now, that could be because the Celtics haven't completed their investigation satisfactorily. That could be because right now they think the relationship was consensual, but there might be evidence to prove that at some point that it wasn't consensual. That might be because they just couldn't make up their mind yet, or they want to see how he reacts during the suspension, or what happens going forward. That raises the next question that I want to talk about. Certainly in this case, where we have a violation of a policy, In order to remedy that violation, do you have to fire the perpetrator? The answer is no. You are not required by the law to fire the perpetrator. But that's true even in a case where you have sexual harassment. There's nothing in the law that says that if somebody sexually harasses somebody else, you must fire them. That's generally speaking what we do, depending on the facts and circumstances, but we don't always have to do that. What does the law require? The law requires that we take prompt, appropriate, remedial action to see that the harassment stops. Now, depending on the nature of the harassment, or in this case, the policy violation, that could be something as simple as a written warning or a verbal warning or some kind of warning. And it could be something as extreme as termination. And it can be something in between. Now, most companies aren't NBA teams, and most companies don't suspend people for a full year. But you could suspend somebody for 5 days or 2 weeks, certainly, can't you? And a high-level manager, you might want to consider suspending for even a longer period than that. Well, Steve, these people, they're all salaried. I got to pay them anyway, don't I? No, you don't. Not if they're not working. If the employee is not working during the work week, they don't have to be paid for that work week, even if they're exempt. Okay? Now, the Celtics say, they don't say this in the press release, but I read someplace else, that along with this suspension, there are significant financial penalties. Presumably, he's losing his salary for the year. They're not going to suspend him with pay. What kind of punishment is that? They're probably suspending him without pay. I don't know that. I'm assuming that. I guess what I'm trying to say here, and what I'm trying to get across to all of you, is these are complex issues, and they require thought. And there is no one-size-fits-all every time it works for everybody. You have to give some thought to what happened. Was it a violation of your policy? How serious a violation of your policy was it? And what are the consequences going to be for the employee? All right. Now, if you want to know everything you'll ever need to know about harassment, not policy violations, but harassment, although I do talk about policy violations in the training, we have a training program for you. We have a sexual harassment training program for management. We sell it. It's on video. You get a little quiz with it and everything that you can give to your employees. It's for management only, not rank and file employees. It's for your management employees only. And if you're interested in that, reach out. You'll see my ugly mug for about 55 minutes, and there's a PowerPoint that goes with it and the whole ball of wax. So if this is something you think you need, and if you haven't trained your managers and supervisors lately, you really ought to think about it. Give us a call, and we can hook you up with that. Or we can come out and do it live. We're happy to do that still, too, now that, again, that COVID has largely, hopefully, dissipated. We got fancy new vaccines and all that good stuff. Give us a ring, and we'll be happy to help you out. Have a great week or two, and we'll see you next time.